many regions that can claim to have a haunted history, tales of ghosts, apparitions, myths and legends, and few more so than the Cotswolds. And in the Cotswolds, there are few towns that can claim to be quite so haunted as the market town of Moreton-in-Marsh. Now, I'll be learning more about Moreton in just a moment, but first we're off to the neighbouring Cotswold town of Chipping Campden for a bit of wonder. It was from this place, Camden House, a ruin now of course, that one William Harrison set out on August the 16th, 1660 to collect rents on behalf of his employer, Lady Camden, a journey from which he did not return, at least not for 2 whole years. As a consequence of his curious disappearance, 3 innocent people were hanged for his supposed murder, and those are the bare bones of what's now known as the legend of the Camden Wonder. When William Harrison failed to return to Chipping Campden by nightfall, his personal servant, one John Perry, was dispatched to search for him. When he also remained missing all night, Harrison's son Edward joined the hunt and finally found Perry coming from the direction of the nearby village of Charingworth. Together, locked no doubt in speculation as to what fate could have befallen the missing man, the pair walked from Charingworth, over there, to here, the village of Ebrington, where residents confirmed that they had in fact seen the missing Harrison the elder. Armed with this information, Harrison the younger and Perry returned over there to Chipping Campden. In the meantime, a hat, a blood-stained neckband and a comb had been found in Ebrington. They were identified as belonging to the missing Harrison. Suspicion immediately fell on Perry, who was promptly arrested and held for questioning. Perry had a reputation as a drinker, a liar, and an all-round wastrel, but one thing he was not was the silent type. As soon as he was taken into custody, Perry's tongue began wagging a mile a minute. First, Perry claimed that Harrison had been murdered by a tinker, a tale that was swiftly disproved. Then Perry pointed the finger at his own mother and brother, who were promptly arrested. After much legal toing and froing, and all sorts of confusion engendered by John Perry's overactive and self-damning imagination, Perry, his mother, and his brother were hanged for the murder of William Harrison. On August the 6th, 1662, nearly 2 years after the executions, William Harrison returned to Chipping Campden, claiming that, while out on his original rent-collecting mission, he'd been abducted by 3 men on horseback. He was, he said, taken to Deal and placed aboard a ship, which was subsequently captured by Turks. Sold into slavery, Harrison spent those 2 years in Turkey, but when his master died, he managed to make good his escape and his return. Various theories have been put forward to try and account for this bizarre tale, the most credible being that Harrison had been embezzling rent money from Lady Camden. Fearful of discovery, he'd decided to fake his own death. But why then did John Perry feel compelled to confess to a non-existent crime, especially since it meant his death and that of his immediate family? That mystery remains unsolved to this very day. However, I'm hoping to solve some of the mysteries surrounding Moreton-in-Marsh when I meet local author Mark Turner, chronicler of Cotswold folklore and mythology. He's waiting for me right now here at the very haunted White Hart Royal Hotel. So, Mark, I think we've established that the Cotswolds are a pretty haunted sort of area. Just how haunted are they?
Very haunted indeed. I've amassed a large collection of stories from all around the district: Chipping Campden, Stow-on-the-Wold, Moreton itself, various other villages, lesser known ones. A really substantial number of stories that I think suggest the Cotswolds is amongst the most haunted areas in the country.
Mm-hmm. And the very sort of epicentre of all that haunting is Moreton-in-Marsh itself. I mean, is it fair to say that Moreton is probably the ghost capital of the Cotswolds?
You could put it like that. Moreton is very haunted indeed. I've got quite a number of stories that I've collected there, and no doubt there will be more forthcoming before too long.
Mm-hmm. And the White Hart Hotel itself?
Yes, the White Hart Hotel, where we're seated at the moment, is probably amongst the town's most haunted buildings. And indeed, you could do a lot worse than speak to the owner and licensee, Mr. Robert Steen, who can give you his own experiences.
So, Robert, the reputation of the White Hart Royal Hotel is that it's a haunted place, but that reputation's built around 2 rooms specifically here, isn't it?
That's correct.
Yeah. So, room 7's the first of those. Tell us a bit about that.
Well, we hear from many guests over different occasions, whether they're staying with us for one night or more, that occasionally, usually in 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning, very late in the night, that guests would hear people upstairs moving furniture, walking around the room to make cups of tea, opening wardrobes and changing clothes, taking off shoes and kicking them around, stories like this. And in the morning when they come to complain about it, we listen to it respectfully, but then we probably would take the guest outside, show them the bedroom window where they've been staying, and show them that above that bedroom window, there's nothing. There's no room above the room number 7. But there are stories that this used to be accommodation years and years and years ago, and it was probably used for accommodation 350 years ago, but certainly not in the last 100 years. It's now just a storeroom with Christmas baubles and presents.
Right. So you've got room 7, which is people who like ghosts will want to stay there, people who won't will definitely not want to stay there. And which is the other room that's notoriously haunted?
Room number 21, which is slightly newer, and this is probably about 100 years later on when it was built. And there are stories there of doors opening and closing for no reason. We had a honeymoon couple staying there one night, and their night was terribly fraught. They hardly slept at all on their honeymoon because there was a ghost in the room. The husband, in fact, at one stage decided he'd talk to the ghost to try and get it to go away, or at least to make peace and be friendly, because his wife could get no sleep at all with all the noise of the doors and the drawers.
Do we know what this ghost looks like?
No, I've heard from 1 or 2 people that it's a lady dressed in white, and just she sits at the end of the bed and will go into the cupboards and what have you, but apart from that, that's all I know of her.
Minster Lovell Hall, on the edge of the Cotswolds, was once the home of the ancient and venerable Lovell family, who provide a widely told local legend known as the story of the mistletoe bough. One Christmas, so the story goes, a party was held at the hall to celebrate the wedding of William Lovell and his innocent young bride. As midnight approached, a game of hide-and-seek was suggested, with Lovell's bride challenging her husband to be the first to find her. After she'd been gone for a while, the hunt began, and continued, and continued. No sign could be found of the missing wife. In desperation, Lovell and his guests turned the hall upside down, but the girl had apparently vanished into thin air. The rumour spread that she'd run off with a lover, and unable to bear life without her, William Lovell eventually died of a broken heart. Years later, an old chest was discovered in an attic at the hall, and, when it was opened, was found to contain a female skeleton. Lovell's bride had not run off at all, merely hid herself too well and become trapped when the lid of the trunk slammed shut on her. Even today, it's claimed, William Lovell's desperate sobs and cries can be heard echoing around the ruins of Minster Lovell. No trip to the Cotswolds is really complete without a visit to a site absolutely loaded with legend and mythology, the Rollright Stones in Oxfordshire. There are 3 principal sites at Rollright, a stone circle dating from about 2500 BC, known as the King's Men. At the far end of the adjacent field, there's a group of large stones known as the Whispering Knights. And just across the road, a giant monolith known as the King Stone. Once upon a time, as it might have been, an ancient king stopped off at Rollright on his way to conquer the whole of England. There he encountered an old witch. Some say it was the famous soothsayer Mother Shipton. Maybe so. Whoever it was, she learned of the king's ambitions, and she set him a challenge. She said to him, 7 long strides thou shalt take, and if Long Compton thou can see, King of England thou shalt be. With unfailing enthusiasm, the king strode out, replying, "Stick, stock, stone, as King of England I shall be known." But as he took the 7th and final stride, a mound of earth rose up before him, obscuring the view of Long Compton in the valley below. The witch then came back and said, "As Long Compton thou canst not see, King of England thou shalt not be. Rise up, stick, and stand still, stone, for King of England thou shalt be none. Thou and thy men hoarstones shall be, and I myself an eldern tree." And in that instant the king and his men were turned to stone, as were a small group of knights who were huddled together, some say conspiratorially, some say quite innocently in prayer. Whatever, if you let your imagination run riot, you can clearly see that they are leaning together, either plotting or praying. Stratford upon Avon, and this is how it would have looked in medieval times, is of course synonymous with Shakespeare. However, there are plenty of local legends, myths, and downright curiosities that don't have any direct bearing on the bard. One of those stories, depicted in tableau here at the World of Shakespeare exhibition, shows a summer journey by Elizabeth I from London to Kenilworth Castle to attend a party that was legendary for putting the L into lavish. Yes, it really was one L of a do, but more of that later on in the programme. First, let's go just across the street to the rear of the very legendary Royal Shakespeare Theatre, where we find the far from famous but distinctly curious game of Nine Men's Morris. This is the board, or if you like, the pitch on which Nine Men's Morris used to be played, and although Shakespeare makes passing reference to this strange outdoor pursuit in A Midsummer Night's Dream, the origins and indeed the method of playing the game are largely lost to antiquity. All I can say is that if you thought those 3D games of chess that you saw played in old episodes of Star Trek looked difficult, they've got nothing on this. The basic principle seems to be that you have two players who each have 9 pieces, and the object is to try and line up your own pieces whilst trying to stop your opponent doing just the same thing. The long and the short of it is, this is somewhere in between Mahjong and backgammon and solitaire, and it may be that there are people out there who still play Nine Men's Morris, but if so, they're a lot brighter than me, because I can't understand this at all. No, not for me today, ladies, thank you very much. One tale of which Shakespeare would most definitely have been aware is the rather grisly story of one Charlotte Clopton. She was a local beauty who lived at nearby Clopton House, which these days has been converted into comfortable apartments. And her tale apparently inspired the end scenes of Romeo and Juliet. In 1564, Charlotte died of the plague and was rapidly interred. A fortnight later, her mother died of the same dread disease. When Charlotte's crypt was opened in order to inter her mother with her, it was found that Charlotte had been buried alive. Back to Shakespeare and a place that he would have known extremely well, Ettington Park. A milestone near the entrance tells you that you're 6 miles from Stratford, but you're also more than 900 years back into history, for Ettington has been in the hands of the Shirley family since before the time of the Domesday Book, and it remains in their ownership to this very day. The house is now a grand and luxurious hotel, and it's one that's rich in legend. Robert Holton, you're the head concierge here at Ettington Park, so if anybody's going to know about the haunted history of the place, I guess it's you. Can you talk us through some of the sightings and the spooky goings-on that have occurred here?
Of course I can. Our most famous one of all, out of the two really, is the Grey Lady. She was a maid of the house who was pushed down the main staircase by one of the ladies of the house because the lady of the house thought she was having an affair with her husband. So, unfortunately, she broke her neck at the bottom of the staircase, and ever since then, she is meant to haunt the top of the staircase. Also, what she does as well is, along the main staircase, she tries the door handles of rooms. So late at night, like for night porters, they actually sometimes say they can hear the door handles being tried, but there's nobody there. Also, one of her tricks is to actually ring from the room using the telephone. And also, we have the 2 children. They are 2 of the Shirley children. They went to play out in the river one day, down by, well, not in the river, but went to play in the garden, sorry. And they had a little raft. They went onto the raft, onto the river. And unfortunately, they fell off the raft and drowned. And again, supposedly, they're meant to haunt outside. We had some guests who stayed in the Star Suite, and they complained over the weekend of hearing children playing, crying, being